when Shaquille O'Neal walked into the lobby of Meridian Ancestry Labs on West 57th Street in Manhattan on the morning of February 8, 2024. He was wearing a navy pullover with a small hole at the left cuff, a pair of dark jeans, brown work boots, and a knit cap pulled low over his ears. No jewelry, no watch, no driver, no security. Just a man who had taken the subway uptown from a hotel in Midtown and walked the last 3 blocks with his hands in his pockets and his breath showing in the cold morning air. 4 championships. A net worth north of $400 million. One of the most recognized faces on the planet. And on that Thursday morning at 9:14 a.m., in a marble lobby that smelled faintly of cold coffee and floor polish, he was invisible. Which was exactly the way he wanted it. Because he had come there to find something he had been looking for since he was 7 years old. And he wanted to find it the way an ordinary man would find it. With no camera crews. With no publicist. With nobody in the room who knew who he was. The security guard at the front desk did not look up from his phone. The receptionist behind the glass partition did not look up from her computer. A young woman in a beige coat brushed past him toward the elevator and did not look up at all. He walked to the desk. He waited. He said absolutely nothing. The first thing he noticed was the plaque above the elevator bank, the brass one that was supposed to read Meridian Ancestry Labs, Est, 1998, except the second N in Ancestry was missing entirely, and had been long enough that the screw holes had darkened around the edges. He looked at it and said nothing, and filed it away. The second thing he noticed was on the reception desk itself. A framed photograph, tilted slightly, showing a middle-aged white man in a lab coat shaking hands with what looked like a governor at some ribbon cutting from the early 2000s. And leaning against the frame, half hidden behind a stack of intake forms, a small wooden carving of a woman with a basket on her head. West African, Ballet, maybe, or Senufo. The kind of piece you buy at a market in Abidjan or Bamako. It had a small crack running down the woman's back that had been repaired, badly, with what looked like clear nail polish. He looked at it for 3 seconds. He said nothing. He filed it away. The third thing he noticed was on the counter, held down by a coffee mug. A small stack of printed emails, the top one from what appeared to be the lab's legal department, with the phrase subject, chain of custody discrepancies, Q4 review visible in the header. Underneath it, another email with a subject line he could only read the first 3 words of before it was covered, regarding the results for. He looked at it for 2 seconds. He said nothing. He filed it away. The fourth thing he noticed was the sound, a soft rhythmic clicking coming from somewhere behind the wall to his left. Not typing, not machinery, something slower. Like beads being counted one at a time against a hard surface. And every few clicks, a woman's voice, murmuring in a language he could not identify, but which had the specific melody of somewhere west of the Sahara. He heard it. He said nothing. He filed it away. And then the receptionist looked up. Now here is the part that nobody in that lobby understood yet. Not the receptionist. Not the security guard. Not the young woman in the beige coat. Not the middle-aged white man in the lab coat who was about to walk through the frosted glass door behind the front desk. What Shaquille O'Neal knew, walking into that lobby on that Thursday morning, was one single fact that would rearrange every single thing that was about to happen over the next 14 days. He had been carrying this fact quietly for 34 years. Since a Sunday afternoon in Newark in 1990, when he was 7 years old, and his grandmother Ada May had reached into the top drawer of her nightstand and taken out a small object wrapped in a piece of yellowed muslin, and had unwrapped it slowly on the kitchen table between them, and had said to him, in the voice she used only for things that mattered, "This came from your great-great-grandmother, baby. Her name was Sissy. And this is the only thing she brought with her." And what the receptionist, who was about to look up and smile at him, had absolutely no idea about was that the man in the navy pullover standing in front of her desk was carrying that same object in the front pocket of his jeans right now. And trust me, you are not going to see where this ends up. Because what happens over the next 14 days, and what he finds at the end of it, is not what he came into that building looking for. Stay with us for the whole video. Because the reveal at the end is the reason this story is worth telling in the first place. To understand why Shaquille O'Neal was standing in a Manhattan genealogy lab on a Thursday morning in a knit cap and a pullover with a hole in the cuff, you have to go back 61 years to a small brick house on Littleton Avenue in Newark, New Jersey, where a woman named Ada Mae Harrison kept a nightstand next to her bed with 3 drawers in it, and where the top drawer had one thing in it that mattered more than everything else she owned combined. Ada Mae was 5 feet 2 inches tall, and she weighed maybe 115 pounds, and she had been born in 1928 in a small town outside Macon, Georgia. Her mother had been named Eleanor. Her mother's mother had been named Mabel, and Mabel's mother had been named Cecilia. But everyone had called her Sissy, because Cecilia was too long a name for a woman as small as she was, and because Sissy was what her own mother had called her in a language that nobody in the family remembered anymore. Sissy had been born, according to family memory, sometime around 1802. Nobody knew exactly where. Nobody knew exactly when. What the family knew, passed down in the specific way that black families pass down things that the official records were designed to erase, was that Sissy had come across the Atlantic on a ship, and that she had been very small when she came, and that she had carried one thing with her, hidden in the folds of the only piece of cloth she was allowed to keep. And that thing had been passed from her to her daughter Mabel, and from Mabel to her daughter Eleanor, and from Eleanor to her daughter Ada Mae, and from Ada Mae, on a Sunday afternoon in 1990, to a 7-year-old boy named Shaquille, who had been the only great-great-great-grandson she had lived long enough to meet. The object was a small brass bell, about the size of a walnut, dark with age, hanging from a piece of leather cord that had been replaced maybe 4 or 5 times over 2 centuries, but had always been retied in the same specific double knot that nobody in the family had ever been taught, but which every woman in the line had somehow known how to make. The bell did not ring anymore. Something inside it had rusted shut generations ago. But if you held it to your ear and you shook it very gently, you could hear the small dry sound of whatever was inside it moving. Ada Mae had put it in his hand on that Sunday afternoon in 1990. She had closed his small fingers around it, and she had said the sentence to him that he had carried with him for the next 34 years. "You take a long time to come home, baby. You hear me? You take a long time. But you come home." He had not understood it then. He had thought it meant he should not stay out too late playing with the boys down the street. He had nodded seriously. He had put the bell back in her hand, and she had shaken her head and had closed his fingers around it a second time. And she had said, "No, baby. This is yours now. You carry it, and when you're old enough, you go find her." Ada Mae Harrison died on March 3, 2010. Shaquille was in Boston, playing for the Celtics. He flew home the next morning. In her nightstand drawer, folded into her Bible at the Book of Ruth, there was a piece of loose-leaf paper with 3 names on it in her careful, slanted handwriting: Sissy, Mabel, Eleanor, and underneath in slightly darker pencil, as if she had pressed harder, one more line: "Go find her, baby, when you're ready." He had kept that piece of paper folded into 8 in his wallet for 14 years. He had kept the small brass bell in a velvet pouch in the top drawer of his own nightstand. He had touched them both at various times without ever quite being ready. And then, in the fall of 2023, on a flight from Los Angeles to Atlanta, he had watched a documentary on his tablet about a woman in South Carolina who had traced her family back to a specific village in Sierra Leone using Dina and a fragment of a song her grandmother used to sing. And when the flight landed, he had sat in his seat until every other passenger had left the plane, and he had opened his phone, and he had scheduled the earliest appointment he could get at Meridian Ancestry Labs in Manhattan, under the name of his business manager. Because he wanted to walk in like anybody else. That was how he ended up in the marble lobby on West 57th Street on the morning of February 8, 2024. The receptionist's name was Melissa Boyd. She was 34 years old. She had been born in Yonkers. She had gone to Fordham. She had wanted once to be an editor at a small literary magazine, and had spent 3 years after college working 2 jobs and applying to positions that never called her back. She had taken the job at Meridian in 2021 because it paid $21 an hour and had health insurance. She was not unkind. She was tired, which is not the same thing, but which produces, on some mornings, the same effect. She looked up. She saw a large man in a knit cap and a pullover with a hole in the cuff. She smiled the small, tight smile she smiled at everyone. And she said, "Sir, do you have an appointment?" Shaquille said, quietly, "Yes, ma'am." 9:30, under the name Perry. She typed. She looked at the screen. She looked back at him. She looked at the screen again. And then, without quite meaning to, she said, "The Perry appointment is for the executive package. That's a $1,500 consultation. Is this appointment definitely for you?" The security guard, who had not been listening, looked up. Shaquille did not blink. He did not smile. He did not frown. He said, "Yes, ma'am, it is." She said, "Okay, it's just, some of our promotional packages start at $99, and I want to make sure you're at the right," he said, gently. The Perry appointment. 9:30. Executive package. "That's mine." She said, "All right," and she picked up a phone. He waited. He did not move. He did not sit down in the leather chairs against the wall. He stood exactly where he was, hands folded in front of him, looking at the small wooden carving of the West African woman with the basket on her head, half hidden behind the stack of intake forms. Now, Melissa Boyd was not a cruel woman. She was an exhausted one. And the difference between those two things is the difference between a story with a monster in it and a story with a mirror in it. What she did not know, and what nobody in that lobby knew, was that at the exact moment she was picking up the phone to call the back office, a 67-year-old woman 4,000 miles away, in a village in Sierra Leone that the maps spelt Talia, but that the villagers had always spelt Talia, was sitting on the front porch of a concrete house with a corrugated tin roof, counting beads on a wooden string against the arm of a wooden chair. Click, 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 and every few clicks she was murmuring the same phrase in Creole, under her breath, the way a person prays without knowing they are praying. Edicom Bach. He is coming. He is coming. He is coming back. She had been saying it since she was 6 years old. She had learned it from her grandmother, who had learned it from hers. She did not know who was coming. She did not know when. She only knew that her family had kept a small clay pot on a shelf in the back room of the house for as long as anyone remembered, and that the pot had a lid on it that had never been opened in any living person's memory, and that her grandmother, on her deathbed in 1971, had held the woman's small child hand and had said, "When he comes, you open it. Not before. You will know him. He will have the sister to what is inside." Her name was Isata Kamara. She was the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of a woman named Fatmata, who had been the twin sister of a girl named Sissy, and who had watched from the beach at Bunce Island on a specific morning in 1809 as a British slave ship pulled away from the loading dock with her sister on it, and who had run into the water up to her waist and had thrown something into the surf toward the ship, and had watched her sister catch it against her chest, and had watched the ship disappear over the horizon, and had gone home to her mother and had lain down on the floor and had not spoken again for 11 days. What Fatmata had thrown was one half of a matched pair of small brass bells, cast by the same smith, filled with the same seeds, tied with the same double knot, made to be a pair from the day they were made. One had gone across the Atlantic in the hand of a 7-year-old girl who would be renamed Cecilia by the family that bought her in Charleston. The other had stayed on a shelf in a back room in a village on the coast of what would eventually be called Sierra Leone, waiting for the other half to come home. Melissa Boyd hung up the phone. She said, "Sir, Dr. Holloway will be right out." Shaquille said, "Thank you, ma'am." Dr. Nathaniel Holloway was 58 years old. He had been born in Greenwich, Connecticut. He had a PhD in molecular biology from Yale and an MBA from Wharton, and a small chip on his shoulder about the fact that Meridian, which he had founded in 1998, had been outpaced in the last 5 years by 3 competitors with larger marketing budgets and worse science. He was not a racist. He was a snob, which is a different thing but which produces, on some mornings, some of the same effects. He walked out through the frosted glass door in a lab coat over a pale blue button-down, and he looked at the large man in the navy pullover, and he said, "Mr. Perry?" Shaquille said, "That's the name on the appointment. My real name is Shaquille O'Neal." There was a small silence. "Dr. Holloway said, I see." And then, after a beat, "Well, that's a pleasure. Please come back." They walked through the frosted glass door and down a hallway that smelled like copier toner and industrial hand soap. Dr. Holloway kept glancing at him, not with recognition, exactly, with the specific calibration of a man who is trying to figure out how much this particular customer knows about the science he is about to be sold. In the conference room at the end of the hall, Dr. Holloway sat down on one side of a long table and gestured for Shaquille to sit across from him. He opened a leather folder. He said, "So, the executive package includes autosomal DNA, mitochondrial DNA, Y chromosome analysis, and a personal consultation with our lead genealogist to interpret the results. Turnaround is typically 3 to 4 weeks. Given the profile, I've asked our genealogist to work with an outside firm we sometimes partner with for cases where the client has particular expectations about their results." Shaquille said quietly, "What do you mean by particular expectations?" Dr. Holloway said, "Well, some of our high-profile clients come in with hopes about their heritage. Sometimes those hopes align with what the science shows. Sometimes we have to manage expectations. I just want to be up front with you about that process before we begin." Shaquille said, "I don't have hopes, Dr. Holloway. I have a name." He reached into the front pocket of his jeans. He took out a piece of loose leaf paper folded into 8, softened at the creases by 14 years of being carried. He unfolded it slowly. He placed it on the table between them, facing Dr. Holloway, 3 names in careful slanted pencil. "Sissy, Mabel, Eleanor," he said. My great-great-grandmother's name was Sissy. She came across the Atlantic sometime around 1809. I do not know where she came from. I do not know what her name was before she was named Sissy. I do not want you to manage my expectations. I want you to do the science, and I want you to give me the results. All of them. Even the ones you don't think I'll like. Dr. Holloway looked at the piece of paper for a long time. Then he looked at Shaquille. Then he looked at the piece of paper again. He said, "All right, that's straightforward. Let's do the cheek swab." They did the cheek swab. Shaquille signed the paperwork. He put the pen down carefully at the exact center of the leather folder. He stood up. He shook Dr. Holloway's hand. He walked back down the hallway, past the reception desk, past Melissa Boyd, past the small wooden carving of the woman with the basket on her head. At the door of the lobby, he turned. He said, "Miss Boyd?" She looked up. He said, "Have a good morning, ma'am." She said, "You too, sir." The door closed. Now here is where the story does something you are not going to expect, because 2 weeks passed. 14 days, during which Shaquille O'Neal did not think about the results even one time. He had a foundation event in Orlando. He had a broadcasting commitment in Los Angeles. He had a nephew's 9th birthday party in Newark. He carried the small brass bell in the velvet pouch in his coat pocket the entire 2 weeks. He touched it, through the fabric, maybe once a day. He did not shake it. He did not open the pouch. And on the morning of February 22nd, 2024, at 8:47 a.m. Eastern Time, an email arrived in his business manager's inbox with a subject line, "Results Perry Appointment, Confidential." His business manager forwarded it to him. He was in a hotel room in Charlotte, sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his sweats. He opened it on his phone. He read it twice. The email said that his maternal haplogroup traced with 94% confidence to a specific coastal region of what is now Sierra Leone. It said that his closest genetic matches among the current database were in South Carolina, Georgia. And this was the line that stopped him. A small cluster of individuals who had submitted samples through a partner organization based in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and who all lived in a village on the coast approximately 40 miles south of the capital. The village was spelt. In the email, Talia. He read the line 4 times. He put the phone face down on the bed. He got up. He walked to the window. He looked out at a parking lot in Charlotte. He said out loud, to nobody, "Okay, Grandma." Okay. 2 days later, without telling anyone except his business manager and his mother, he was on a plane to Freetown. He landed at Lungi International at 11:14 p.m. local time. He took a boat across the estuary. He slept 4 hours in a hotel near the water. In the morning, he hired a driver named Ibrahim, a quiet man in his 50s who drove a white Toyota Hilux, and he asked to be taken to the village of Talia. Ibrahim looked at him in the rearview mirror. He said, in careful English, "You have family there?" Shaquille said, "I might." Ibrahim nodded once. He put the truck in gear. They drove south for 2.5 hours on a road that was paved for the first hour and unpaved for the second. They passed a market. They passed a mosque. They passed a school with children in blue uniforms sitting outside under a mango tree. At just after 10 a.m., the truck pulled off the road onto a red dirt track that ran between 2 rows of banana trees, and at the end of the track, in a clearing under a wide sky, was a village of maybe 40 houses, most of them concrete, some of them still mud brick, with corrugated tin roofs and cooking fires already smoking behind them. Ibrahim stopped the truck. He said, "Talia." Shaquille got out. He was wearing khaki pants and a plain gray t-shirt. He had the velvet pouch in his front pocket. He walked into the village slowly. Children stopped playing and stared. A woman carrying a plastic bucket on her head stopped walking and stared. A man on the porch of a small shop stood up and stared. Nobody said anything because they were all doing the specific small math that people do when a very tall stranger walks into a small place. Ibrahim caught up to him. He said, quietly in Creole, to the man on the porch, "We are looking for the family Kamara." The old family. The oldest one. The man on the porch looked at Shaquille for a long moment. Then he looked at Ibrahim. Then he pointed, without saying anything, down a small path to the left that ran between two houses, toward a concrete house with a blue door. Shaquille walked down the path. Ibrahim followed him. The path was maybe 40 feet long. At the end of it was a small porch. And on the porch was a wooden chair, and in the wooden chair was a 67-year-old woman in a green wrapper and a matching head tie, counting beads on a wooden string against the arm of the chair. Click, 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 she looked up. She saw him. She stopped counting. She stood up. Slowly, she did not smile. She did not speak. She looked at his face for what felt like a very long time, but was actually about 11 seconds, and then, without taking her eyes off him, she said in Creole, quietly to nobody, "Edacom. Edacom Bak. He is coming back." Ibrahim, standing behind Shaquille, translated softly. Isata Kamara turned around. She walked into the house through the blue door. She was gone for maybe 2 minutes. When she came back out, she was carrying a small clay pot, about the size of a grapefruit, with a lid that was sealed with what looked like wax that had cracked in 100 places over 100 years. She set the pot down on the small wooden table on the porch. She looked at Shaquille. She said, in careful English, "You have something." Shaquille said, "Yes, ma'am." He reached into his front pocket. He took out the velvet pouch. He opened it. He took out the small brass bell on the leather cord with the double knot. He held it up between his thumb and his forefinger. Isata looked at it. She did not move. She did not blink. And then, very slowly, she reached down to the clay pot on the table, and she took the lid off. And she reached inside, and she took out a small brass bell, dark with age, hanging from a piece of leather cord tied in a specific double knot. The two bells were exactly the same size. They had exactly the same shape. They were dark with exactly the same age. They were cast, anyone could see it standing 3 feet away, by the same hand. Isata held her bell up next to his. She held the two of them together, one in each hand, 6 inches apart, in the sunlight on her porch. She looked at Shaquille. She said, quietly, "You took a long time to come home." Shaquille O'Neal, 6'10" and change, 47 years old, 4 championships, $400 million in the bank, wearing a plain gray t-shirt in a village in Sierra Leone he had never heard of 2 weeks earlier, felt his knees go, and he sat down on the wooden step of the porch of a stranger who was not a stranger. And he put his head in his hands, and he cried the specific quiet way that men cry when a thing they have been carrying since they were 7 years old is finally allowed to be put down. Isata sat down next to him on the step. She did not touch him. She did not say anything for a long time. When he was quiet again, she said, "Your grandmother told you to come." He said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "My grandmother told me you would." She turned the 2 bells over in her hands. She said, "The one you have is the one that went. The one I have is the one that stayed. My grandmother said, when he comes, you open the pot, not before. I have been keeping this pot on that shelf since 1971. My mother kept it before me, Her mother kept it before her. Nobody has opened it in 200 years. She shook her bell, very gently. Something inside it rattled. A dry, small sound. She said, "Shake yours." He did. The same sound. She said, "Baobab seeds." My grandmother told me. 7 in each. When the sisters were separated, their mother put 7 seeds in each bell and closed them so that they would each carry a piece of the same tree. She looked at him. She said, "Fatmata was my grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. Sissy was your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother. They were twins." Fatmata threw the bell into the water when the ship left. Sissy caught it against her chest. They were 7 years old. Shaquille sat on the step for a long time. He looked at the 2 bells in her hands. He looked at the red dirt of the path. He looked at the mango tree at the edge of the village. He looked at Isata's face, which had the same shape as his mother's face, and the same shape as his grandmother's face, and the same shape as the face of every woman in his family, for as far back as any of them had ever been able to remember. He said, quietly, "My grandmother told me one thing when she gave me that bell. She said, 'You take a long time to come home.' But you come home." Isata said, "My grandmother told me one thing when she gave me this pot. She said, 'Ere kambak.' He is coming back." She stood up. She held out her hand. She said, "Come inside. Eat something. You have been traveling." He stood up. He went inside. Now here is the part that people miss. Because when you tell this story, most people stop right there, on the porch, with the 2 bells. But Shaquille O'Neal stayed in Talia for 6 days. And on the 3rd day, sitting in the shade of the mango tree with Isata and her 3 grown daughters and her 7 grandchildren, and about half the village, he learned something that reordered what he thought his trip had been about. Because Isata told him, on the 3rd day, that Fatmata had not been the older twin. Sissy had been, by about 11 minutes. Which meant that in the way the Kamara family reckoned it, the older line, the line of the eldest daughter of the eldest daughter, had gone across the water in 1809 and had not come home for 215 years. The line that had stayed in Talia was the younger line. Isata was the younger line. Her mother had been the younger line. Every woman who had kept that pot on that shelf had been keeping it not for a stranger. She had been keeping it for the head of the family. The eldest of the eldest of the eldest. Which meant that Shaquille O'Neal, sitting under a mango tree in a village on the coast of Sierra Leone in a plain gray t-shirt, was not just a visitor. He was, according to the way the Kamara family had reckoned it for 215 years, the head of the house. And the small clay pot with the bell in it had not been waiting for anyone. It had been waiting for him. He did not say anything for a long time when Isata told him this. He looked at the ground. He looked at the mango tree. He looked at Isata. And then he said quietly, "My grandmother's name was Ada May. She never got to come here. She died in 2010. Isata said, "Then we say her name at the fire tonight. And we say the names of every woman between her and Sissy. And we say them in the place where they were supposed to be said." And that night, sitting around a small cooking fire in a clearing behind Isata's house, with the 7 grandchildren fed in quiet, and the 3 daughters and about 15 neighbors gathered in a loose circle, Shaquille O'Neal said the names his grandmother had written on a piece of loose leaf paper folded into 8 in his wallet for 14 years. He said Sissy. He said Mabel. He said Eleanor. He said Ada May. He said Lucille, which was his mother's name, who was still alive in Orlando, and who he would call in the morning. And then Isata said the names on her side. She said Fatmata. She said the name of Fatmata's daughter, and her daughter, and hers, all the way down to her own mother, who had died in 2019. And when all the names had been said, one of Isata's granddaughters, a 10-year-old girl named Aminata, stood up in the firelight and sang a short song in Creole that Isata told him, afterwards, was the song the mothers of Talia had sung for 200 years for children who were far from home. He recorded the song on his phone. He listened to it on the plane back to New York a week later. He listened to it in his hotel room the night he landed. He listened to it in Newark, sitting in the small brick house on Littleton Avenue that his family had kept in the family after Ada Mae died. Sitting on the edge of the bed next to the nightstand that had held the small brass bell for the last 30 years of her life. He put the bell back in the top drawer of that nightstand. He did not take it with him again. Because it was home. Because he had brought it home. Now, Meridian Ancestry Labs is a small footnote in this story, but there is one more thing to say about it. Because when Shaquille got back from Sierra Leone, he called Dr. Nathaniel Holloway. Not to complain, not to threaten. He called him and he said, "Quietly, doctor, I want to ask you something." "Doctor," Holloway said, of course. Shaquille said, "When you told me some of your high-profile clients come in with hopes about their heritage, did you have a plan to manage mine?" There was a long silence. "Doctor," Holloway said. "Mr. O'Neill." Shaquille said, "It's okay. I'm not asking to make you feel bad. I'm asking because I want to know." "Doctor," Holloway said, quietly, "Yes, I did." Shaquille said, "Thank you for telling me the truth. I appreciate it. I want you to know that the results your team gave me were accurate. They led me to a village I did not know existed, and to a woman who had been waiting for me since she was 6 years old. Your science was good. Your assumption about me was wrong, and I want you to think about how many other clients you have had that assumption about who did not have the money or the platform to walk in the way I walked in." Dr. Holloway did not say anything. Shaquille said, "There is a young woman at your front desk named Melissa Boyd. She was tired the morning I came in. She was not unkind. She was tired. And I know the difference. Please tell her, from me, that the appointment was worth it. And please tell her that the young woman with the small wooden carving of the West African woman with the basket on her head, that is a ballet piece from Té d'Ivoire, and it deserves better than nail polish holding it together. If she wants to send it to me, I know a conservator in Brooklyn who will fix it for free." "Doctor," Holloway said, "I will tell her." Shaquille said, "One more thing, doctor. I am going to be starting a small fund this year. It is going to pay for DNA testing and follow-up travel for anyone descended from the transatlantic trade who wants to make the trip and cannot afford it. I would like Meridian to be one of the labs that partners with the fund, if you are interested in doing that work, and if you are willing to do it without managing anybody's expectations." Dr. Nathaniel Holloway, on the other end of the phone, in a corner office on West 57th Street, said the sentence he had not expected to say when he picked up the phone. He said, "Yes, Mr. O'Neill, I would be interested in that." A woman on a porch in Sierra Leone, who had been counting beads for 61 years, learned that the person she had been counting for was real, and had a face, and had come. A 10-year-old girl named Aminata learned that the song her grandmother had taught her was a song a stranger from very far away could recognize as his own. A tired receptionist in a marble lobby learned that the man in the pullover with the hole in the cuff had noticed her, and had thought of her, and had asked after her when he came back from a trip she did not know he had taken. A scientist who had built his career on managing expectations learned that some clients arrive with something better than expectations. And a small brass bell that had crossed the Atlantic Ocean in the hand of a 7-year-old girl in 1809 learned, finally, what home smelled like on the other side of a 215-year trip. His grandmother had been right about the only thing that had ever mattered. You take a long time to come home. But you come home. He did, and so can you. Now, if this story moved something in you, do us a favor and drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We read every single one of them, and there are people all over the world sitting with this story tonight, and we want to know who's out there with us. If you believe that the people we come from are still with us, if you believe that a small object in a drawer can carry 200 years of love across an ocean, hit that like button. Because that is how stories like this one find the person who needed to hear one today. Subscribe to the channel, because we are building a community here of people who believe that home is a real place and that it is always waiting for you. And we want you in it. And when you are ready, click the next video on your screen. Because there is another story there. And we will see you there.